Okay, well, it's 3:02. We'll go ahead and get started here. Thank you for joining us for the 2021 Go Virtual Career Pathways Conference. I'm Brian Glassford from the San Diego County Office of Education's Innovation Division, and will be your Zoom host today. Please feel free to use the chat to ask any questions throughout the session. They will be answered during the presentation and also during the Q&A towards the end. So now I'd like to introduce Alex Cotran from the AI Education Project with the presentation, AI Literacy and Workforce Readiness, What Your Students Need to Know. Take it away, Alex.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brian. It's like a nice, intimate group, which is awesome. It's going to be an interactive presentation anyway, so I encourage you all to unmute yourselves and chime in with questions if you have them. I'll keep an eye on the chat as well. So I have a presentation to share. I'll just do a quick introduction. So I'm Alex Cotran. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the AI Education Project. My parents are both immigrants. My mom is a teacher. She's taught in Title I school her whole career. For the last 30 years, she's a principal now. And so I grew up around education and around like seeing the power of education to change people's lives. And that really stuck with me. But let's go ahead and talk about, AI education and what this means for educators. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation. Can everybody see it? We're all good?
All good. We got it.
Okay, so AI EDU, we're an education nonprofit, and we develop curricula about AI in the future of work. We make it available to classrooms across the country, and we really focus on making it easy to get into schools that are disadvantaged or in underserved communities. And we're going to be talking today about artificial intelligence. It's a technology that companies like Google are calling the new electricity. And my hope is that you'll leave with both a newfound appreciation for how important it is that we teach students about AI, as well as the belief that any teacher, perhaps even yourself, have the ability to bring this knowledge to your classrooms. So we're going to talk to you about AI EDU. We're going to show you a little bit more about our curriculum. But before we dive into that, I just want to talk about what AI is and why it's so important that we help students understand. So we're going to start with a quick activity, and we're going to ask, what's the first word or phrase that comes to mind when you hear that comes to your mind when you hear the words artificial intelligence? And so I have a Slido poll. I don't know if you've done one of these before, but it's very easy. You just go to slido.com, SLIDO.com, and you enter that code in right there, and just type in whatever comes to your mind. And Brian, feel free to do the same. Twenty more seconds. Okay, someone's a Terminator, that almost always happens. And so this is kind of the problem. Artificial intelligence teachers and students often say things like robots, Terminator, Armageddon, and that's not surprising. It's the way that most of us have experienced artificial intelligence so far has been in the realm of science fiction and pop culture. But AI is very little to do with what we see in the movies. So in terms of definitions, we define artificial intelligence as computer systems that perform tasks or make decisions that would otherwise require human intelligence. And AI is around us all day. It's used, it's a young technology, but it's used in nearly every sector of the economy. It helps determine what media you watch. It helps you sift through your emails and flag spam emails. It also determines the content that you and your friends see when you log into platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. But it's also being used by pharmaceutical companies. It's used by entertainment studios to create lifelike 3D graphics. It's used by banks to monitor transactions for fraud. And it's also vulnerable to biases and misuse that are already having an impact on your students. But so let's talk a little bit about why this matters to educators. And I'm going to start with jobs. I'm going to throw some studies up here. So economists predict that as many as half of all jobs are at risk of automation, and that this is going to happen very soon. And in fact, I think we already see it happening under our feet, thanks in part to the COVID-19 pandemic, where white collar and blue collar jobs alike have been impacted across virtually every sector of the economy. And that's going to persist and continue. And you know, it looks like it's going to get much, much more profound. And so we want to help students dream about the future and imagine possibilities and prosperous pathways for themselves. And the question is, how can we expect them to do that if they don't know what the future is going to look like? And I'd say there's a terrifying mismatch right now between the careers that students are currently imagining for themselves and the opportunities that are going to be available. But AI also is impacting students' social and emotional well-being. So I mentioned that AI is behind the content that people consume. This has a huge impact on emotional well-being because algorithms are behind basically the content that's competing for students' attention, and the content is often sensationalist and often overly emotional, or designed to elicit a dramatic response from the user. And it's having an impact on students, and we're seeing that in terms of correlations with increases in attention deficit disorder and depression. And algorithms are also being used to optimize results that make people angry and scared and delighted, and also promote standards of beauty. They're behind the way that young people think they're supposed to look and behave. In the very near future, AI is going to be behind, what we actually perceive as real. And I'm going to play this short video just to illustrate that.
I am not Morgan Freeman. What you see is not real. Well, at least in contemporary terms, it is not. What if I were to tell you that I'm not even a human being? Would you believe me? What is your perception of reality? Is it the ability to capture, process, and make sense of the information our senses receive? If you can see, hear, taste, or smell something, does that make it real? Or is it simply the ability to feel? I would like to welcome you to the era of synthetic reality. Now, what do you see?
Okay. Oh.
I am not.
He's definitely not Morgan Freeman. Okay, so I'm curious, just like for the audience's reaction there, just like what was your initial? I don't know if you've ever seen a deep fake before, but that video was created with a technology called deep fakes that uses neural networks and artificial intelligence to increasingly perfectly mimic the visual appearance and voice of people. And feel free to just unmute yourselves and chime in.
I'm surprised they didn't make him a little bit younger. No, that really is that's a fascinating how far this has come along. I remember seeing the deep fakes from a few years ago, and now it's just that's fascinating that they can get it as detailed as it is.
Yeah, I mean, it still is. I think the technology is still not widely used and impacting people day to day yet. But like what gives me pause, for example, is thinking about what happens when it does become widely available and cyberbullies get their hands on the technology and decide to use it. How are students going to be equipped to assess, like whether what they're seeing on the internet is actually real? And we're already seeing, obviously, I would say really nascent examples of that even in the last 4 years, and it's going to get much worse. And so we have to work proactively, we think, to address that and make sure students are aware of it. The third and final reason we think AI education is so important is because underserved groups and students of color are particularly vulnerable to the negative impacts that the technology is going to have. And as I said before, it's not neutral, or AI isn't neutral. It's developed by humans, and the biases and the blind spots that we have are imprinted on the technology. And that means that AI can propagate and even worsen the impact of bias and discrimination. And low-income students and students of color are more likely to live in communities that are going to see not just job displacement from the technology, that is the case, but also, some of these really negative implementations where AI is being used in the criminal justice system to, in like almost like this dystopian reality where they're actually using technology to predict who's going to commit crimes and decide where they're going to deploy police, and it's having impacts on people today who are being wrongfully accused by algorithms. And so we've talked about this in our curriculum, and students really they perk up because this connects with something that they are thinking about really deeply, and that's the social justice, which is very important to Gen Z. And there really is a big social justice angle to AI. So anyways, three key takeaways. AI is ubiquitous. It's all around us. It's going to eliminate a lot of jobs and create, a new economic reality. And it's going to have disparate impacts on students, and we have to help them avoid those risks. So what can we do about it? So I'll tell you what we're doing about it. And we think that while we're not the only solution, we're, perhaps a really good example of what this solution could be. So my nonprofit, AI EDU, we're a 501c3. And we spent the last 2.5 years proving that any teacher can bring AI into their classrooms. So we started with a 300 student pilot in Akron, Ohio last year, which is where my mom teaches actually. So we kind of had a little bit of a backdoor there. But we've since grown, reached 30,000 students in 9 states. We've raised about $2 million to date from a number of companies, some of them listed here. And we launched our program in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and our curriculum was designed to work in a wide variety of settings with remote, hybrid, or in-person content and lesson plans. And the curriculum is designed to be platform agnostic, so it works with the majority of learning management systems that schools are using, so primarily Google Classroom and Canvas. And I'd say that we've grown by 100x, in large part because our approach works. So nearly 1 in 5 students who complete the curriculum report that they intend to explore a new career path. And nearly 9 in 10 report finding our activities engaging. So, there's something to this. And so just here's an overview of what we're teaching. So we're talking about the future of work and digital citizenship, and AI is the main character in that. And we've demonstrated something really big, and that's that you can easily integrate AI-focused career exploration and social emotional learning into existing courses, A, with minimal PD for teachers, B, with 0 technical prerequisites for both educators, but also for students. And those are 2 really key barriers that are standing between women and people of color and other underrepresented groups in STEM fields. And so, by doing this, we're actually promoting diversity in artificial intelligence while the field is still relatively young. And, if you can think back to the early days of the computer science field and, what we could have done if we had paid more attention to some of the disparate ways that certain groups were getting access to that knowledge and to the inspiration to pursue those careers. And sort of we're trying to act proactively to make sure that doesn't happen with artificial intelligence. So diving into the curriculum. So our materials are research-backed and evidence-based, and we design using the 5E instructional model, in addition to a few other pedagogical frameworks. And there's a deliberate focus on project and game-based learning with pre-built modules that plug into Google Classroom and Canvas, as I said. And I would say AI is a powerful topic in part because it helps students connect with technology, but it does that because it's used in such a wide variety of industries and use cases. And so this allows for a multidisciplinary approach, and it helps teachers respond to the growing calls for more multidisciplinary curriculum in their classrooms. But I think most importantly, it helps connect with students who don't necessarily think of themselves as STEM students. Maybe they're interested in the arts or politics or sociology. And what we show them is that all of those fields are being revolutionized by artificial intelligence and technology, and that, whatever your interests are, there's a role for technology in the future and in the career that you imagine for yourself. And so we're creating these STEM mindsets in students that don't normally opt into STEM learning opportunities. And that's been really big. And I think one of the driving forces behind why schools have been working with us is to use us as a stepping stone to additional learning that they may offer themselves or that they may have sort of in their community available to students. And as I mentioned, our curriculum is short, so it's designed to be inserted into an existing class. We've had it inserted into English classes and history classes. It's most often integrated into career exploration. And so there are only 4 modules and an optional final project. And so I'm going to show you just like a couple examples of what this looks like. The explore section is really where we try to capture students' interest and kind of like initiate that curiosity. We do that through a series of, mostly games, but also some videos demonstrating some of like what AI looks like and kind of bringing it to life. And I'm just going to show you one game that we've gotten good reviews for. And it's called Quick Draw. And it was developed by Google. And I'm going to make sure that everybody can see my screen. I think the answer is yes. Just let me know if you can't. And
yeah, we're good.
Okay, so the way this is literally what you would see if you were a student or a teacher in the classroom. So you click Let's Draw an arm, and I'm really bad at this actually. So
I see line or garden hose or fork. I see toothpaste. Oh, I know, it's arm. I see line. I see square or bench. I see picture frame.
oh gosh, I don't even know how to do this.
Oh, I know, it's oven.
Got it. I'm gonna do one more.
I see diving board or seesaw. Oh, I know, it's anvil.
Okay, so we show students this activity, but then we also show them. Let me see if I can get to it. Here we are. So we show them this, which is the data set. And so students can actually, you can actually click on Anvil and see all of the drawings that the neural network has been processing to guess. And this is just like a really beautiful, I think, visual way of understanding not just some of the ways that AI works, in this case with machine vision and prediction, but also, conceptualizing what data actually is and what are different forms of data. So yeah, back to presentation. So after we've done some exploration, we ask students to actually develop some formal skills. Most of these are actually aligned to English learning standards. And this was really intentional. We wanted to align to learning standards that were, English learning standards tend to be the most consistent or quite consistent between states. And in many, if not most of the school districts where we're who we're talking to, literacy and reading comprehension is, always at the top of their list. And especially with COVID, as I'm sure all of you know, reading proficiency has dropped and is something that schools are really paying attention to. And so once again, we want to be able to make this something that schools that are really strapped for resources and feel like they don't have the ability to bring in technology education and STEM programs like robotics. We want to make this something that they can actually fit in even with, their limited resources and, really significant challenges that they have with students. And, the other thing about these activities are, you see the students are writing a blog post. One of the things students are actually tasked to do is to write a letter to the editor with their perspective on algorithmic policing and whether that's, how they're envisioning the balance between technology that could be used to improve safety, but that in doing so may also disparately impact, certain groups. And is that okay? And students love that. And there's something about, Gen Z does have this really strong social justice awareness, and the desire and, connecting technology to social justice has been, really effective, especially when we're talking to, to students of color. And then we show, and so this is where we're doing scenario-based prompts, and this is exactly like where the formative assessment happens. And so there, as I showed you earlier, there's sort of a fork. So when students are actually completing their assessments, those assessments are aligned to their interests. So if that's STEM, we have STEM aligned assessments, and then obviously ones that are more aligned to humanities, which is where the criminal justice one comes in. And the goal is on developing and exercising critical thinking and persuasive communication skills, which is right in the sweet spot of those English and reading comprehension standards. And so most schools opt to complete the curriculum with a summative final project, and this is a PBL module that is all about basically developing a pitch. It's kind of like a business pitch, but a little bit less intense than actually creating a business idea. It's more just coming up with some use case that they would like to pitch in terms of how could AI be used in a field or topic that students are interested in. And this is where students really just come alive. And what's so cool about this project is some of the different ideas that students have had in like since those students have come up with those ideas, we've actually seen companies launch. So one example is a student said, well, I really want to go and work in Hollywood, and I'm going to use AI to actually replace some human actors in certain cases for certain instances. And I think like a couple months later, like the first ever AI actor was announced, and I forget which studio announced that. But it just goes to show that like there's actually when you remove the technical component and give students the chance to actually just sort of like think at a high level, they really dive into this and get quite creative. And so I'm just going to go over the stats again because I just think it's so important. Like the portion of students who said they felt comfortable explaining AI to someone else, like a family member, increased really significantly. And like we think that's one of the core litmus tests is like, are you building this familiarity and comfort with students so that they are able to like use it as a foundation for more learning? And so we're also seeing that interest in future learning. And I think that's the power of supplemental curriculum like this is it basically can sort of put students on a pathway to the additional opportunities that there are. So, and I'm sure there are many organizations that presented even at this conference who are providing some of those opportunities. And where we come in, we think, and where AI literacy can come in is creating that spark and creating a sense of urgency in students and maybe even teachers to understand what they should be focusing on in terms of their pathways. So that's it. That's all I have. I know that that's not 50 minutes, Brian, but I figured we'd leave lots of room for Q&A and give people a chance to take a break if not. But yeah, curious if folks have questions. I know Brian, you added a couple ones, but
yeah,
we can start with it.
Just kind of tying into the career readiness side of things. Do you see that this is utilizing AI early on in students' educational experiences will kind of give them that boost that they need to overcome what seems to be the inevitable with a lot of the automation of jobs, especially entry level?
And so the interesting thing about automation and specifically AI enabled automation is that it's not necessarily only happening to entry level jobs. It's actually happening sort of across the board. And if you look at lawyers, there's a lot of tasks that lawyers are doing that are being automated. There's a lot of tasks that obviously accountants, people that are doing financial crime, people that are doing forecasting, advertising. There's a lot of high skill jobs that are being automated as well. And so the message to students is less about we're going to help you like navigate your job disappearing, because I don't think any school is really trying to put a student on the path to becoming a server or something like that. It's more about equipping them with a curiosity to really ask the right questions when they're thinking about their pathway. So an example is one of the schools that we worked with, their career exploration core class. It was like a semester long, and one of the classes was spent on truck driving. And so the teacher kind of pulled up the Ohio website where you apply to get the license and showed the whole process of how you become a truck driver. And that was kind of the class. And that was it. And at no point in that class was there any discussion about, and here are all these futuristic companies that are trying to automate truck driving and replace truck drivers altogether. And so I think there are moments where we can help orient students towards pathways that we know are more resilient and away from ones that are less resilient. So the answer is yes, but yeah.
Yeah. Just wanted to let everybody know that we do have some more time that we can discuss, answer some questions. I am going to drop in a evaluation form for this session so we can get an idea of how we can improve sessions like this in the future. And also we have our certificate of attendance up. So if you would like to take a screenshot of that to prove that you did attend the session, please go ahead and do so. I think the truck driving, right, Mark, I am happy he is discussing the truck driving by robots, right? That was kind of one of the things that really set me off on diving deep into a rabbit hole about AI quite a few years ago when they first, I think it was Volvo that first started coming out with some of these self-driving trucks. And it's really interesting to see how it still requires a truck driver. It's just that truck driver doesn't have to be nearly as aware or really in line with the operations of the vehicle anywhere near what they used to. So do you see that there's going to be a point where there is that truck driver is not even going to be required to be present any longer?
That was a question for me or for Mark? Sorry. Question for me?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a great example. It's like, so if you really are interested in logistics, and that's not necessarily a wrong career to go in. And in fact, there's actually a really big need for truck drivers. And so this is sort of one of those ironic instances where a field that is actually at risk of automation is actually, right now looking for more staff. I think truck driving in the future, what everybody basically will say is that humans aren't completely out of the equation. But if you're going to be working logistics, you're probably going to be managing a fleet. You might be in the truck itself, but you're going to be a technologist. You're going to be utilizing all the tools, monitoring the systems to make sure they're safe. And there's definitely going to be a huge need for students who are truly interested in logistics and trucks and want to be the mechanic or be in that sort of control center that's managing it and helping companies decide when to deploy. There may be electric trucks or self-driving trucks only in certain components of the delivery system. And so there's going to be jobs where you design those systems for companies and help them plug in different, providers, let's say. So it's very rarely there are very few jobs that are going to completely disappear and where the message to students would be, you should pick something else. But I think it's more like, if you're interested in X, like, for example, we had a student who was really interested in marine biology. And she told us, after learning about AI, I realized I also want to major in computer science because I want to be able to use technology to study marine biology. And that's exactly the outcome that we look for is, helping students connect technology opportunities with their careers. And right now, we're working with a lot of community colleges as well, in addition to middle schools and high schools and dual enrollment programs. And there are, some community colleges already have, in Skyline College in San Bruno that we're working with, they have something called alternative pathways to tech. And it's all about what you just described, Brian, is what are these new pathways into technology that you may not have thought of and that are not necessarily just you sitting in front of a computer coding.
Mm-hmm. And can you tap in a little bit more about that? What sort of educational pathways are currently available that would really allow students who are not just interested in the topic of AI, but would actually guide them into a career that would be focusing on artificial intelligence or how it can actually be grown?
Oh, I mean, this is the thing. It's this is one of the most fast-growing spaces in education right now. There are so many credentials and certificates being developed. GM and ISTE just announced one. I've been talking to a number of large companies and telecommunications companies that are developing certifications. Amazon has their own cloud certification. NVIDIA has one. Pretty much all the developers of AI, they want students to be using their tool set and systems. And so credentials are huge, and especially in community colleges where a 2-year credential makes more sense. Those opportunities are all over the place. Our curriculum is not it's not the end of the conversation. It's the first step. And I think there is still a role for, educators to think about, in sort of the learning progression of students, what comes between, students getting excited about artificial intelligence and them achieving the post-secondary credential or a degree to get there. But we think getting students excited is the most important part of that equation. If the student's not excited, no matter how high quality the programs are, you're not going to be able to get them there. And so yes, there are a lot of opportunities for students right now. Cybersecurity is a huge field. An example that maybe people may not have thought of is the human-computer interaction component. So for a company that's going to be building artificial intelligence and deploying it, there are really a lot of questions about the best way to do that. And so AI has a lot of predictive capabilities, but a lot of companies now are hiring ethicists and people to actually think about, how do I design a system that works in harmony with people? Or so if you're like a hospital system that wants to deploy AI that, for example, reads MRI or X-ray scans, there's actually research that shows there's a very specific way that you do that. You don't just have the computer do all the work and have the person check it. You actually have the person look at the scan, identify the area that they think is most important, or rather the computer looks at the scan, will identify sort of a hotspot that the doctor should focus on. And what it does is it makes the accuracy is way better than just a person by themselves, but it also makes the speed of getting to a diagnosis a lot faster. And so there's gonna be a lot of examples like this, and that's a totally new field. I mean, there are opportunities for students to actually blaze the trail. And I would also argue that Gen Z is the best equipped to doing this. Like, they're already very savvy users of TikTok and Snapchat. And, students don't know this, but they're actually manipulating the TikTok algorithm when they try to teach it what they like and don't like. Like, that is them training the algorithm. They just don't realize this. And so Gen Z is very astute, and they're going to be, we think, the best equipped to helping companies think through these challenges.
Right.
And I saw, oh, go ahead, Brian.
No, please continue.
I was just going to answer Mark's question about China. So it's like a loaded question. Let me respond first with, the AI education project. Like, our idea is not innovative at all. It's actually like, China's been doing this since 2018. They launched introductory foundational AI curriculum from high school down to elementary school. They've been doing this for a long time. It's scaled now on a national level. It's very sophisticated. India just announced a plan to teach 1 million citizens about AI literacy. Finland, Singapore, others are doing this. So on the one hand, in response to the answer about China's way ahead of us in terms of recognizing the importance of this. And China is also, unfortunately, an example of some of the more malicious ways that AI can be used in terms of surveillance and controlling political discourse, for example.
It brings up an interesting question when it comes to what students should really understand when they're exiting their primary and secondary educational experiences. Part of the conversation we're having right now is around language and whether or not students should be not only given the opportunity to learn a coding language, but should that be something that's required, like a foreign language, as they exit high school? I'm seeing this more now as a conversation of whether or not the AI aspect should really be more included, and that should be part of an obligatory obligatory educational experience, as opposed to learning an actual coding language. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so what I would say is we're actually advising the Ohio governor on this, and tomorrow I'm giving a presentation to an advisory group that AIEDU sits on, where we're actually helping them rewrite the computer science standards to include AI literacy. If you look at Bureau of Labor Statistics, how many Americans work in STEM fields? It's 6% today. And so even if we think that's going to increase to 10%, like, the truth is that every student is not going to become a computer scientist. Like, that is just the absolute fact and truth. And frankly, every student doesn't even want to become a computer scientist, even if they had all the opportunities to do so. Right. And so, I think computer science as a foreign language makes a lot of sense. Like, you don't need to know a foreign language to operate in society, but it obviously is very enriching and opens up opportunities. I think AI is different, though. I don't think AI is something like that you should opt into as an optional thing, because I think no matter what career you're in, that 94% of Americans are all in fields that are impacted by artificial intelligence. And unlike computer science, there's much more direct impacts on them if they're not aware. Like, if you're not a savvy customer, you're going to be falling victim to a lot of the manipulation that companies are doing and doing with your data and feeding you with the content that you see online. There's many other examples of this. Mortgage applications are being reviewed by artificial intelligence. I actually just talked to we're hiring candidates, and I talked to a candidate who works for a company that uses AI to actually screen college applications. Wow. And even she said, I'm really concerned because I can see that certain types of kids are being, are being sort of like left out because the algorithm is, doing basically population level analysis. And, to me, that's the sort of thing that if I was a student, I would want to know. I'd want to know that there's an algorithm that's going through my application, and, maybe there's certain keywords that I really need to be including in my essay. So yeah, there's more examples, but I'll stop there.
Well, and I'm glad you actually went there. There's an article actually in the Wall Street Journal of today, and the title of the opinion is "The Challenge of Being Human in the Age of AI." And they bring up a really interesting question I was hoping maybe you could address. Reason is our primary means of understanding the world. How does that change if machines begin to think?
Yeah. So this is actually like a broader topic. So there's an interesting question that's worth asking students, which is, what does the future look like where the lines between you and technology are increasingly blurred? So, I think like when I was in high school, using technology was a very deliberate thing. You would go to the computer lab, sit down, and then access the internet. And it was, sort of there was an on-off switch. Whereas now, I'm pretty sure most students, the first thing they do when they wake up is check their phones. And from like, by the time they're eating breakfast, they've already spent 20 minutes on social media. And by the time it's the end of the day, they've maybe spent hours on social media. And when you think about like gaming and almost all of the ways that students are entertaining themselves, like all of that is being influenced by artificial intelligence, whether it's through the predictions and the content or through the actual creation of the content itself, like with things like gaming and VR. So it's an important question. And so there's a question about just like, what are the social and emotional learning outcomes that students have to have that we need to equip them with to be able to really navigate that deftly and to not be manipulated, or to at least be somewhat insulated from some of the manipulation that we know is already out like rampant. But then there's another more interesting question, which is also like, what's the point of work, right? Like what does it mean to live a fulfilled life? And what does what does the future look like if half of people actually aren't working, and that's okay because there's so much productivity, and that's something that we've begun to think about as like an English standards aligned activity or discussion where students are actually charged with reading some material where people are predicting what the future of work might look like, and sort of weighing in terms of like, what does work mean to you in terms of your sense of self. But yeah, I don't know if that goes over, we're still not sure if that's going to go over students' heads or not. It's a bit meta, but it is important, right? It's like something that we're obviously thinking about.
Well, something that'd be more grounded for students, especially when it comes to their interactions with AI and with these algorithms that are online. Do you feel that once students go through your curriculum, going back to some of the statistics that you showed about, it went from what 7% up to 50% could actually explain to somebody what AI is. Do you feel that that also means that they have a little bit of extra layer of protection and understanding that how AI, as you put it, can manipulate social emotional interactions?
I do, because I think that the core outcome, like learning outcome that you need to have, is that there's a reason that you're seeing the content that you're seeing. Like there was something trending on TikTok called slap a teacher, and students would go up and like literally slap their teacher. And, not that many people saw those videos, but the students who saw those videos may have been under the impression that this is something that everybody is doing. Mm-hmm. And so, just understanding that, hey, I saw this video, but it was fed to me because I watch a lot of pranks, and that's why I'm seeing content like this. And that doesn't mean that, and the same goes with, like standards of beauty, where, with like the influencer culture that's out there, students are being fed, way more signals about what standard of beauty looks like than any of us were, when we were kids, and understanding why that is and being able to caveat that, I think is really important. It's something that, and I think that students are actually quite intellectually savvy and already instinctually understand it. And what we do is we sort of help them connect the dots. Because a lot of students actually know, like if you ask them what is artificial intelligence, they'll give you a better answer than the teachers will, because they'll say, oh, it's used in, to create, the computer characters in my game, and tell them what to do, and that's totally right. And Mark asked a question about, will everyone benefit? And so I think that's like the question to ask, and I think the answer is, what we've seen with the internet is that the benefits have been really tilted towards people who have pursued opportunities to be connected with the technology economy. So, like all of the wealth, I'm in San Francisco right now. And, this is a great example of a city where there's been an incredible amount of wealth created, but it's been created for people who are in some way are around the technology industry. And I think artificial intelligence is going to be the same way. The benefits are going to be concentrated. And so whether or not you get a piece of that pie, I think is going to be determined by, how technology enabled is your career, and how, are you in a career that's actually, or do you have the skill set, even more so than the career, do you have the skill set to add value in that sort of new world? And, we're the first step in that process, but I think this is part of a bigger project, right? Which is, how do you make sure students have all the skills that they're going to need? And that's something that even continues into college. But yeah, I mean, I think if we don't ask that question now, we're going to find that the answer is going to look very similar to what it looks like now with the internet, where I wish I was taught about that the internet is not all true. Like we spent very little time talking about sources. Like my English teacher just said, don't use Wikipedia. That was about the extent of it. And you could imagine if only that they had spent some more time talking about the importance of really scrutinizing sources on the internet and making that something that every student really took home, we might be in a slightly different place than we are today with misinformation.
Part of the conversation, especially in the educators' sphere around AI, is how it makes things easier, how it actually will be thinking for people. It'll take over certain roles and responsibilities. But in terms of critical thinking skills, how is there anything that we can do to try to mitigate the potential of our future generations really leaning on and relying on AI technology that would eventually start, kind of ticking away at their ability to actually develop some of those critical thinking skills?
I'm honestly less worried about that. I think there's always going to be really big problems for people to deal with in that human intelligence. There's like empathy is really important, and that's something that AI can't do, right? If you think about like the problems in basically the entire services sector is based on empathy in some way, interpersonal communication, understanding, the nuances of how people respond. And I think that's where we're going to be applying a lot more of our critical thinking skills. And I think if you look at the stuff that AI is automating, it's the more boring stuff and the stuff that people aren't necessarily excited to do anyways. And so yeah, I'm actually not as worried about that.
Okay. We do have about 7 minutes left. So if anybody else wants to chime in, please do so. Otherwise, I'm definitely going to take this conversation a little bit deeper down the rabbit hole and bring up artificial general intelligence. And if you have any thoughts about that, I'm just very fascinated about the aspect of consciousness actually being developed through this process, eventuality.
Yeah, so that's where a lot of the money has been going in the AI research space. And so just for everybody else, like artificial general intelligence is like another way of, people talk about it sometimes as the singularity, but basically this point where AI becomes so powerful that it essentially can emulate almost any task that a human could do. And if it gets to that point, it could then design itself into this sort of super intelligent sort of thing that could become either quite powerful or maybe even, we could lose control over it. And that's what Elon Musk and Bill Gates have talked about. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a fascinating problem. It's almost a philosophical problem as much as it is a technical one. We may not ever see it in our lifetimes, even if AI becomes much more sophisticated. So it's a sort of thing that is very interesting to think about philosophically. But I think for the purposes of students, we don't really talk too much about AGI in our curriculum because we think it's a bit of a distraction almost from like the key takeaways that people need, which is more, more focused on like careers, society, and like what it means for you as a citizen and consumer today.
And that makes plenty of sense. That absolutely makes plenty of sense. Well, that pretty much wraps it up for us today. So we appreciate everybody's attendance. Again, you can take a picture of the attendance certificate that is available up on the screen.